Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Leonard, Managing Consultant at Landrum, and welcome to our video series. Today, we're talking about something that sounds like a technology topic, but is actually a management topic because AI isn't just changing what work looks like, it's changing what leadership is. And the key shift I want you to keep in mind during our time together today is that although historically managers used to be valued for awareness, knowing what's going on with their team, their value is quickly changing to that of an architect, designing how work flows. That's the current headline. What we're going to dig into today is what really changes when AI moves from theory into the fabric of your team. Decisions are getting faster, but are they always better? Work gets automated, but accountability might get blurry. Output goes up, but trust can go down if leadership doesn't evolve. My goal today is that you walk away with a few aha moments that you can use immediately, especially if you manage people, projects, or outcomes. All right, quick disclaimer, then we'll jump right in. What we'll be covering today is general HR guidance and best practices based on what we're seeing across small and mid-sized organizations. Every workplace is different and employment decisions are highly fact specific. So this isn't intended to be tax or legal advice. If questions come up that are specific to your organization or your policies or your unique situation, that's where your CPA or your employment attorney should be brought into the conversation. That said, our goal today is to give you practical, real world insight you can actually use so you have clarity, confidence, and just a better understanding of how to approach these issues thoughtfully and compliantly. So let's start with the shift that's redefining what it means to lead. Leaders can no longer be task managing. They have to start designing workflows. Here's where I see a lot of managers get stuck. They treat AI like it's a productivity hack, like buying faster laptops. But AI isn't a faster laptop. It's more like an invisible intern that works at lightning speed, but has zero context unless you give it some. So if you simply drop AI into a messy workflow, you don't get efficiency, you get faster mess. It's the old adage bad data in gets bad data out. And in the real world, faster mess may look like employees pushing drafts and analysis around without deciding who owns the decision, or teams producing more work but still missing the outcome, or leaders feeling like they're busier than ever, as many of us feel, because now you're reviewing AI output on top of everything else that you do. So, what does designing work actually mean? Well, first, it's your job to define outcomes, quality, and ownership. Notice I said define outcomes, not outputs or tasks. Unfortunately, a lot of teams are still defining tasks or outputs where they should be defining true outcomes. I had a client recently that had a situation come up and they shared it with me, and it completely changed how they viewed outputs versus outcomes based on our time together. So I'd like to share that with you today. This client had a team responsible for managing their client base, as many of us do. And like many organizations, they were trying to get more visibility into what their employees were actually doing day in, day out toward that end. So they invested in automation, and suddenly, they could see everything. They could see every email, every phone call, every text, every touch point. It was all tracked, it was all measured and reported. And for the first few months, it felt like a win until one employee's numbers absolutely shot through the roof. Blew everybody else out of the water. I'm not even talking close. They just, it was a landslide. This person was doing gangbusters. And in comparison to everybody else, who was the clear leader of the team. But here's the problem. Everyone internally knew that that was probably their weakest performer. This person wasn't the one that clients gravitated towards. They weren't the one people were trusting the most. They weren't the one bringing in repeat business. Meanwhile, the employees who had developed deep relationships with their clients were looking pretty bad on these reports. So we dug in. And what we found, it was almost laughable, but it was incredibly telling. The top performer, they'd figured out the system. They were sending quick, unnecessary follow ups, little one line emails like thanks or got it. just to create more touch points because they knew touch points were being measured. They weren't better, they were just better at gaming the metric. And that's when I asked the leadership team a really simple question. Let's say this employee wasn't manipulating the system. Is this really what you want to be measuring anyway? Because what they had created was a perfect machine for measuring activity, but not value. And when I asked them, what's the actual outcome you want from this team? Without hesitation, they all said, we want loyal customers. And so that was our turning point because none of that shows up in a count of emails or calls. So we had to shift focus. Instead of tracking outputs, we had to start measuring outcomes. So, what did outcomes look like for this client? Well, it looked like client retention rates, satisfaction surveys, referrals, long term engagement. And pretty quickly, this company saw their top performers changed. Not because the people changed, but because the definition of success did. Here's what I want you to learn from them. If you measure activity, you'll get more activity. But if you measure outcomes, you'll get better results. It's no different than rewarding someone who has clocked in for X number of hours instead of looking at what they've actually accomplished, right? And in a world with AI where output is easier, faster, and cheaper than ever, this becomes even more critical because AI will help your teams produce more. But as a leader, your job is to design things in a way where AI makes sure they're producing what actually matters to the business. You should also be designing for quality in any AI utilization. I have another client that adopted AI to speed up customer proposals, and it did. Suddenly, proposals were going out faster than ever, but the win rate didn't improve at all. Why? Because nobody defined quality. The AI produced a clean proposal, but it wasn't differentiated. It didn't reflect what actually wins business for that company. So the team was celebrating speed while the marketplace was grading them on substance. You see, if you don't define what great looks like, AI will most confidently produce a generic version. And then finally, you have to define ownership because this is where things can quietly unravel if you're not intentional as a leader. When AI starts doing part of the work, you'll hear a subtle shift in language across your teams. People may start saying things like, well, AI generated it, or the tool recommended it, or the model flagged it. On the surface, all these things sound pretty harmless, but what's actually happening is something a lot bigger. Accountability is starting to diffuse. Because when work is partially created or influenced by AI, it becomes really easy for people to distance themselves from the outcome. Decisions start to feel shared or even outsourced. And in my experience, that's when risk creeps in. You start to see decisions pushed forward without true ownership. You start to see errors that no one fully owns, and a lot of explanation, but very little accountability. But here's the reality, the business doesn't run on the tool said or the model did. It doesn't run on recommendations, drafts, or prompts. The business runs on decisions. And more importantly, it runs on who owns those decisions. So, one of the most important things a manager can do in an AI enabled environment is make ownership unmistakably clear. Who's accountable for the accuracy of the output, the judgment behind it, the impact it has on a client or an employee or the business as a whole? Because AI can assist the work, but it cannot own the consequences. The truth is, if ownership isn't clearly defined, AI won't just speed up your work, it'll speed up your risk. So, as a leader, your role isn't just to adopt AI tools, it's to design a system where every AI assisted output still has a human owner behind it, someone who stands behind the call. Once you've defined outcomes, quality, and ownership, you also need to decide what AI is going to support versus what HI or human intelligence is going to drive. This is where managers earn their paycheck today. AI can support summarizing, drafting, pattern spotting, routing, and triage, but HI drives judgment, ethics, prioritization, relationship repair, context, and nuance. A simple rule to live by is let AI accelerate the what, but keep humans accountable for the why and the so what. And that's really the manager's new job, designing how those two parts work together. Now, this is one of the more counterintuitive shifts managers are dealing with right now. We tend to assume AI automatically creates speed, and it can, but in many organizations, what it actually does first is expose and accelerate existing friction. Think about a workflow that you might have, prior to AI. Maybe it wasn't a perfect workflow. You had a task, the task was handed off, there might have been some confusion, which caused some rework, and then there were delays. Well, then AI is introduced, and the assumption is great, this is going to make everything faster. But here's the reality: AI doesn't fix broken handoffs, it just makes them happen faster. So instead of one confused handoff a week, you're suddenly dealing with five in a day. And that's where the manager's role becomes critical, not as a driver of speed, but as a remover of friction. In real world environments, that friction tends to show up in a few very consistent ways. One of those ways is that confidence becomes a new risk point for you. AI outputs often sound very polished and definitive, even when they are completely off base. So now your team isn't just managing work, they're managing confidence levels. You may start to see your less experienced employees hesitate to challenge what looks so right, or you may have more experienced employees spending time reviewing instead of leading, or teams that are slowing down because they're just unsure of what to trust. And then decisions can become less visible. AI can generate options quickly, but that can create a trap. Work keeps moving, drafts keep evolving, ideas keep expanding, but no one is clearly saying, here's the decision. So part of the manager's job now is to make those decision points unmistakably clear and owned. And finally, I do tend to see that accountability starts to blur. When something goes wrong, the conversation shifts to, well, was it the person? Was it the prompt, the data, the system? And the more ambiguous that becomes, the weaker your performance culture gets. So the goal isn't just to add AI and hope for speed. The goal is to redesign the flow of work so it actually works better so that you can reap the rewards of speed. A strong AI enabled workflow should look something like this. AI handles the routine and the repeatable. The manager steps in, ensuring decisions are clearly owned and outcomes are defined and visible. Because at the end of the day, AI can execute the work, but the manager has to design how the work happens. I want to share three practical ways to start removing some of that friction immediately. First, I would define a clear decision owner. Every AI assisted process should have one person accountable for the final call. Absolutely no ambiguity. Number two, set a simple definition of what good looks like. Three clear criteria, no more than three. That keeps quality intact while speed increases. And then finally, be intentional about human checkpoints. Don't review everything because that creates a bottleneck. Only step in where there's real risk or real impact or complexity. That's the shift. Not just using AI to move faster, but stepping into your role as the person who removes friction instead of just accelerating chaos. This last point is where your leadership becomes unmistakable because AI makes it easy to track work. We have dashboards, metrics, activity logs. You can really measure about anything and everything. But here's the problem: what gets tracked isn't always getting improved. And AI can accidentally push organizations into a kind of a productivity theater mindset. Lots of visible activity, lots of measurable output, but not necessarily better decisions, better customer outcomes, or better culture. So, what should managers do instead? Well, I would suggest that you focus your time on ownership, clarity, and decision making capability. In AI enabled teams, ownership becomes your superpower because AI increases the number of almost finished artifacts, whether they be drafts, summaries, analysis, recommendations. But almost finished doesn't create value. Decisions and outcomes create value. So managers must constantly answer: who owns the final decision? Who owns this result? Who owns the customer or the employee impact? And then we certainly do need to increase clarity as well as managers. AI rewards clear thinking. It also exposes fuzzy thinking. So if your team can't clearly define what problem we're solving or what constraints matter, what success even looks like, AI will amplify that confusion. So clarity becomes a non negotiable for leaders today. Before layering AI into any workflow, challenge your team with a simple test. Ask someone to clearly articulate the goal, the constraints, and the definition of done. If they can't do that, the workflow is simply not ready for AI yet, because AI is only going to amplify that chaos. And then finally, your job as a leader is to develop decision making capability. This one is big, and it's where managers have to evolve. In the old way of doing things, managers were rewarded for having answers. In this new age of AI, answers are cheap. So the manager's job shifts to building a team that can make good decisions without being the bottleneck. Because if AI speeds up work, but the manager still has to approve everything, you haven't really transformed. You just kind of moved your traffic jam. Ultimately, AI is not going to replace managers. It will replace managers who only track work, chase tasks, and approve everything. But managers who design workflow, remove friction, and build decision capability, they are invaluable. So, as you leave today, here's a simple summary. I encourage you to design work, don't just manage tasks. Remove friction, don't just add speed. Improve capability, don't just track activity. AI is going to keep getting more and more powerful, but the organizations that win aren't going to be the ones with the most tools. They'll be the ones with leaders who know how to build work that flows, define leadership, define ownership, and strengthen decision making. As always, Landrum is here to help as you navigate the shift to greater AI adoption within your organization. And as you continue thinking about how this shows up in your own teams, we'll be sharing more AI focused content throughout the month of June that dive deeper into practical applications for managers and leaders. So keep an eye out for those. We'd love to continue the conversation and help you move from ideas into action. Thanks for your time, and thanks for doing the hard work of modern leadership.